Okay, let's talk about Iran, where the internet has basically gone dark. We're looking at a nationwide blackout, a kind of digital curtain that's been pulled across a country in turmoil. So, in this explainer, we're going to dig into why millions of people have been silenced and what this whole crackdown tells us about the crisis that's unfolding on the ground.
And we're not just talking about a slow connection here. According to digital rights monitors, this is a near total shutdown. It's a deliberate move to cut millions of people off from the outside world and, maybe even more importantly, from each other.
And that's really the big question, isn't it? Why? A government doesn't just decide to shut down its entire country's internet on a whim. There's always a reason. To get to the why, we really have to look at what's been happening in the streets. So to be clear, according to the monitoring group NetBlocks, this isn't some kind of technical glitch. No, this is a deliberate, escalating series of moves with a very clear goal: to control the flow of information and stop people from communicating, especially during a critical moment of protest. Right, so the blackout is a response to something, and in this case, that something is widespread protests that have been sweeping across the country since late December. But what's actually driving all these people into the streets? Well, the anger is really rooted in some deep economic hardship. People are dealing with a soaring cost of living, their currency is losing value fast, and a general economic crisis is just making daily life incredibly difficult. These are the core issues that are fueling these demonstrations you're seeing across Iran's cities. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, how the Iranian authorities are actually reacting to all of this. Because the response hasn't been unified at all. Instead, what we're seeing are these conflicting messages coming from different centers of power, and it paints a really complex picture of the state's strategy. On one hand, you've got the newly elected president, Masoud Pezeshkian. He's publicly calling for calm and for utmost restraint from security forces. Now, this suggests, at least publicly, a desire to kind of de-escalate the whole situation. But then, you get a totally different message coming from the judiciary. The country's chief justice has promised no leniency for anyone who creates insecurity. That is a very hardline stance, and it's a huge contrast to the president's call for restraint. And this contrast really shows you how the narrative is being shaped from the top. The top judge is out here accusing demonstrators of working with foreign enemies, while the supreme leader says rioters need to be put in their place. So the key takeaway here is this: the official rhetoric is framing these protests not as a legitimate grievance, but as an attack on the state itself. Now, with that digital curtain pulled shut, getting real information is incredibly difficult. But behind all the government's rhetoric and the digital silence, the bits of information that do manage to get out, well, they reveal a pretty staggering human cost. According to a tally from news agencies, which are citing local and official sources, at least 21 people have been killed so far. And this number includes both protesters and members of the security forces, which really just highlights how violent these clashes have become. And as you can imagine, this has prompted some really strong condemnation from international human rights groups. Amnesty International has been particularly vocal, demanding an immediate end to what it's calling the unlawful use of force and firearms against people who are just trying to exercise their right to protest. And if you want to understand just how serious these accusations are, get this. Look at this specific incident that Amnesty reported on. They described security forces raiding a hospital in the city of Ilam. According to their report, forces fired tear gas, they smashed doors, assaulted people inside, including medical workers, and then arrested wounded protesters who were there simply seeking medical help. It's an absolutely harrowing account of the kinds of tactics being used. Of course, a crisis like this doesn't happen in a vacuum. The violence and the internet blackout have drawn some pretty sharp criticism from the international community, and you're hearing a lot of calls for the protection of basic human rights. It's gotten to the point where the United Nations has officially weighed in. The spokesperson for the UN Secretary General stated that the chief is calling on Iranian authorities to uphold fundamental rights, the freedom of expression, of association, and of peaceful assembly. So this really elevates the whole situation to a matter of serious international concern. And all of this leaves us with a final, really critical thought. An internet blackout isn't just about technology. It's a tool to conceal violence and to control the truth. And it raises this fundamental question for our digital age. When a government can just flip a switch and turn off the internet, who is left to hold them accountable?